ladies and gentlemen. I'm thrilled to introduce our guest, Tim Sanders. Tim is a best-selling author, public speaker, and consultant. He worked with Mark Cuban and at Yahoo after the company acquired Broadcast.com. Today, Tim provides consulting and training services for leading companies and government agencies. This episode just blew my mind. Together, we discussed Tim's new book, Dealstorming, and how his method can help business-to-business organizations close more deals. We also talked about what to do when you have a team of founders with a tech background, how to manage failing at closing an important deal, and more. So without further ado, here's today's show. Hello team, welcome to the Leadership Show.
My pleasure to be with you.
So Tim, I'm very happy to have you on the show today. We created the Leadership Show to spread cutting-edge ideas. And having read your new book, Dealstorming, I can tell that this is a huge step forward for founders and sales teams of business-to-business companies.
Well, thank you.
I'd like to start by putting things into context. Today, a lot of things have changed in sales. And that's why your new book is so relevant. What are some of the main sales challenges for a business-to-business company?
Well, I think that the biggest change for companies is that the selling environment has become increasingly complex. Buyers now are organizing across departments and disciplines to drive down the cost of ownership and to take more control over the buying process. And what this means is that today we don't sell to a person or two, we have to sell to a committee that's doing their own research in a highly technical world. And so what it means for us is that we have to be as good as unteaching as we are teaching to be successful. The other issue is that the nature of what we sell is becoming increasingly laced with technology so much that the learning curve for most prospects is very high. As a result, that puts pressure on us to be more innovative in how we demonstrate our value, demonstrate our unique selling proposition, and do it in such a way that it makes it all very simple, and it makes it easy then for our contacts to sell us forward to other people that we'll never spend time with. Here's the final idea. Because of cloud-based computing, because of the falling cost of starting up a company, and even crowdsourcing, the competition level is so high right now. For you to keep one of your good accounts, it's really hard because there's always somebody ready to swoop in and do it free for 6 months or with a really small annual cash value deal to prove themselves. And so saving your existing account base is just as much of a challenge as winning new business that helps you get a beachhead win in a new vertical.
And you mentioned this complex nature of first having a complex organization to deal with, selling to committees, and then the nature of the product that are getting more complex as well. So at some point you can get stuck. And this is the main topic of your book, is how to overcome these obstacles. And you coined the term Dealstorming. Can you tell us a bit more about it and how it can benefit a business-to-business company?
So Dealstorming is the combination of the freewheeling lateral thinking of brainstorming, thinking up unexpected solutions, with the linear process-oriented approach of deal making, moving through those 4 levels of the deal. Make contact, conceive the win-win deal, convince the prospect you're the best solution, and finish the contractual process. When you combine the lateral with the linear, you have this deal-storming technique. So deal-storming, if I were to just define it for you, Guerric, is this. It's the act of bringing together multiple disciplines to solve a significant sales challenge through collaboration and shared work with a focus on rapid problem solving.
How do you know who are the right people you should team up with, and how many of them you should bring together?
Well, you should bring together one less person than you think you need. I know that sounds like a strange answer, but the reason that's important is because the more people you bring together, the more personalities you have to wrangle, right? So you bring together too many people, you might have too many personalities or too many agendas. But here's the idea. You want to resource your deal-storming team against the complexity and the size of the opportunity, okay? So if it's a really big account, either from a revenue or from a strategy standpoint, and it's really, really stuck, or you see multiple levels of sticking points, then you might have a pretty wide team. If it's just a medium-sized problem with only one sticking point, it might just be 3 or 4 people. But the secret here is diversity of thinking. They can't all be from sales. So the way I would always say to my consulting clients is, ask yourself, who has the biggest stake in the outcome of this deal? Who has to deliver when it's done? Who has to figure out back of house arbitrage, like pricing and billing after it's done? Who is going to benefit or lose if the deal is done? And that is your stakeholder map. And you want to invite them because they're going to be highly engaged, and often they're going to bring in ideas from the edges of the field. The other thing you think about is who has some expertise about this problem we're having. So stakeholders and experts, anywhere from, say, 3 people to 12 people based on the size and the complexity of the opportunity. This is the formula for deal storming.
And you mentioned that Dealstorming is inspired part of brainstorming. And I know that you criticize a bit the process of brainstorming as being a bit fluffy because people come unprepared. What do you recommend for overcoming this problem?
So brainstorming was created in the 1930s by Alex Osborne at the big ad agency. He used it to win the B.F. Goodrich account, which saved the company during the Great Depression. And he had these rules, but they were based on a premise, Guerric, and that's that there is no flower as fragile as creativity. So as a result, he would say things like, we're just going for a long list of ideas. I want you to go for wild ideas. Don't worry if they're workable. And please, no one criticize ideas during the meeting. Okay, so that's what brainstorming is about. For listeners, that's why many of the brainstorming meetings you've been involved with are the most excruciating, horrible situations in your life, because really smart people hate those rules. So instead, I've learned that for the purpose of problem solving in a business environment, we need to have different rules. So here are the different rules that make this unique. First of all, you must prepare for a deal storming meeting at least a few days in advance. And everyone that's invited to the meeting should receive what I call a deal brief, at least 48 hours in advance, that says, here's the sticking point, here's the opportunity, here's the influence map of who we're talking to, here are our activities to date, and here's an assignment for you, team member, to think about between now and then. That triggers the power of incubation. One of the problems with brainstorming is that we're asked to immediately come up with ideas after being given the problem statement at the beginning. You shouldn't do that. A meeting isn't an information dump, it's a problem-solving session. The second thing about deal storming that makes it unique from brainstorming is that you're going to have 3 sections of a meeting. Meeting section number 1 is we're going to have a debate about the real sticking point, the root cause. Because many times the problem we think we have is not the real problem. And that's something that we don't do in brainstorming. We just assume that's the real problem. The second stage of the deal storming meeting is what I call the opening. And that's where we nominate potential solutions and then we indicate what is our assumption behind that solution. The third section of the deal storming meeting is the finalist section. And that's where we have debate about the quality of assumptions and the workability of various ideas. And at the end of the meeting, collectively, we set the next best play. Too often in brainstorming, a meeting is concluded where someone walks out with a flip chart that has 100 ideas and they say, thank you very much for all the ideas. I appreciate your time. In this case, in a deal storm meeting, we say, this is the next best play. All of us can live with it. You're going to do this. You're going to do that. And collectively, we're going to execute it and we're going to do it really fast. And that's how I've taken the valuable parts of brainstorming, collective genius, but made it more process-oriented and, quite frankly, much more satisfying to people who've invested their time and energy and a couple of hours in one of these meetings.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. That's the main problem of brainstorming is actually you get a lot of ideas, but nothing is very actionable and nobody takes action afterwards. So it's kind of pointless at the end.
Sometimes it really can be, right? I mean, there are those rare situations, like if you worked at an ad agency and you got to come up with an idea that's never been thought before for a client that needs something never been thought before. You might need that freewheeling environment, but it's just much more rare than most people think.
And there is something I really like about Dealstorming, your book, is you came up with such a strong method. everything have been thought. And I was wondering, what is the origin story of Dealstorming, and what type of research have you done to define this process?
Good question. It starts in 1997. I'm working for Mark Cuban at his startup, broadcast.com, the one he sold to Yahoo for all that money, right before the market crashed. And at the time, Guerric, broadcast.com was mostly a sports broadcasting startups, right? So we broadcast mostly basketball games over the internet in 1997. And to grow into our IPO, we needed to develop a B2B play, business services, right? So we needed to be able to sell audio and video broadcasting services to big companies like the Intel Corporation or Microsoft or Nike. So that's a hard thing to do, right? So he brings in this new VP from Ascend. They're sort of like Cisco. They sell routing gear. And so this guy, Stan Woodward, he has experience in B2B. And so when he comes to broadcast, he notices that, a lot of us are either doing really little deals or everything's stuck in the pipeline. So our pipeline is like everything is all still like in play. So he gathers us together and he says, listen, when you get stuck, grab somebody that knows something or gives a hoot about winning this deal. Don't go down alone. He says, guys, you're never going to get credit for failing on your own. He says, harness collective brain power and you will make it rain. Trust me. And that's where the whole thing hit me, is that if we can figure out how to build a team around an opportunity based on who cares about it or who knows something about it, we will cycle through this quicker. And it worked. And we went on to have the most successful IPO in history, opening day, pop. We were bought by Yahoo. When I got to Yahoo, 3 months later, the market crashed. And all of our .com customers, went away mostly. A lot of them like eToys or whatever. So we had to rebuild our book of business with traditional companies really quickly. So I had done this deal storming thing like 12 or so times. So our SVP of sales created a department for me so that we could make that a shared service across the enterprise. So over the course of the next few years, we went out and did it 40 or 50 more times. And we were part of $600 million of deal flow in a recession using this crude deal storming process, which kind of got better each time we did it, because I kept focusing on, what can we do to make it faster? What can we do to make the meetings more effective? What can we do to have less bad ideas be launched, against these challenges? And so I became Chief Solutions Officer at the company in late 2001 and had an opportunity to start building relationships with other great sales organizations, say like Oracle or even ESPN, et cetera. And so after I left Yahoo, I created a consultancy. So over 60 different times, I helped companies create Dealstorm teams. We won 7 out of 10 deals. We reduced cycle time for sales by 25%, and it created a much more robust methodology. Probably 80% of what's in the book was developed through my consultancy. But over the 3 years I took writing the book, I also did just a ton of research on other companies and what their analog to deal storming is. I interviewed over 200 sales leaders in B2B to find their best and worst practices. And between that and just doing a massive deep dive into the literature and empirical research around sales collaboration and business development innovation, we were able to kind of get the last few pieces of the puzzle in place. And that's the book that you hold in your hands now.
Oh, that sounds like a total life experience that you put into one book.
Yeah.
This is incredible.
Yeah.
And doing all of this research and consulting as well, what is the main challenge or the biggest challenge you've had to deal with?
So I think the biggest challenge is interestingly enough, to get sales to be willing to collaborate with non-sales world. When I was at broadcast.com, Guerric, that wasn't a problem because we were a startup and everybody had options and they were pesos until we had an IPO or an exit, and then they became dollars. You know what I mean? So it's like that created a shared vision. Employee ownership can change the world, right? That's why startups are so agile. That's why startups are so great at building cross-departmental teams. But when you work at a company that's a little bit more mature, getting everybody to make the leap from me to we is hard. So for a lot of people in sales, believe it or not, it's really hard for them to work with the land of no proactively. In other words, bring in operations, bring in a delivery team, bring in engineering, because they're going to hear no a bunch early on. It's hard for them to bring in what they call the land of slow, which might be marketing or ad ops or whomever, depending on your company, and go through that process. So a lot of times sales just wants to work inside their own silo because it just feels safe. They don't have to build consensus with non-sales people. They don't have to give people a voice in the process, et cetera. And I don't think they know they're doing it. I think it's the nature of collaboration. The root of the word collaboration goes back to a phrase in Western Europe to say, to confer with the enemy. Because collaboration's roots come from the dissident and the insurgent comparing notes to overthrow the king. And so it's printed into our psyche that collaboration is the last resort, not the first move when you get stuck. So in many of my consulting gigs, the thing we had to do was find that test case, that deal that was too important to lose, that account that was too important to lose, do cross-department collaboration, win that thing, show that there's no externalities from the process, and then all of a sudden, everybody in sales is reaching out and wanting to collaborate.
So to summarize, the main thing is to focus on finding a crisis and using this crisis to help the team have a huge breakthrough that will make them adopt this new method. Is that right?
Yeah. Ed Catmull from Pixar once said that nothing, drives creative thinking more than a poke with a sharp stick. So sometimes if you're in a culture where you talk to your sales team about Dealstorming and they're like, I don't know, that sounds really hard. Why do we want to work with marketing? And they will say things like that. You just have to find a deal that matters enough for them to be willing to take on all that extra risk and to take on all those extra voices. And then I think that they'll learn through the process that Dealstorming is the secret weapon.
And how do you get the other teams, not the sales team, but the other teams to be fully committed to the Dealstorming process? Because their KPIs might be not directly aligned with the deal being closed.
Yeah.
So how do you convince them to get on board?
Well, the good news is that most of the other departments, especially the ones that have a stake in the outcome, they've always wanted a voice at the table, okay? There's an old saying in the business world that says, if you're not at the table, you're usually on the menu. You know what I mean? So they want to be there. It's a question now of how do we keep them engaged? Because Dealstorming is not one meeting. Dealstorming is about joining a team and moving through a process which can be multiple meetings and a lot of shared work. So how do we keep them engaged? Well, the answer is don't make it all about the revenue opportunity. The account executive, I call them the problem owner in a Dealstorm, they need to figure out a purpose behind the Dealstorm that is bigger than the revenue opportunity. At Yahoo, I used to use competition. So we had a rival at the time when I was at Yahoo that we really didn't like, and that was AOL Time Warner. After the merger, AOL Time Warner leveraged Ted Turner, the founder of CNN, to go into the market and routinely beat us on deals with his personality and his gregarious way of selling. So we developed a rivalry. And a rivalry is when the pain of losing exceeds the joy of winning. And I would evoke that rivalry when putting together a Dealstorm team. I would tell engineers, marketing leads, operations manager, data analyst, I would say, listen, if we don't win this deal with Procter & Gamble, AOL is going to win this deal. And they would say, what time is the meeting? I'll be there. In certain cultures, you might call upon pride and excellence, like we never get fired from a key account. We're better than that. We're excellent. Let's win it back, and you can inspire emotion. Whatever you do, you got to find some emotional lever that cuts across departments like sales and marketing's KPIs and unifies the team around a sense of purpose. Because not only will it keep them more engaged over this protracted Dealstorming period, they will look out for each other like real people on a real team do.
My next question is about losing a deal. When we sell, inevitably, there are some deals that are not closed. And this can be quite damageable for the company. It hurts the bottom line and sometimes the future of the company, especially when it's a big deal. What should a founder do to deal with this such experience? How can a founder leverage failing at closing a deal?
I think that sometimes success isn't what you learn from the wins, it's what you take away from the losses. So I think it's very important when you have a failure, like you lose a big account, for example. I think it's really important to bring the team together and create an air of transparency and to put out that umbrella of grace so that we can all be very candid with each other about what really happened. and make sure that we're not all blaming it on the client or not all blaming it on the competitor's resources. So if we can find the internal things that went wrong and depersonalize them, okay, so we're criticizing the outcome, not the person, we can have a very constructive conversation that inspires us the next time not to make those same mistakes. I also think it's important to understand that it's never over until it's over. In the book, I have a couple of examples of where companies lost their biggest account. And it seemed at the moment they lost them like it would never come back, right? And what they learned is by giving that client a year or two to cool off, putting a new account executive on the case, showing empathy and humility when re-engaging, it can make a big difference. And in both of those situations, you can actually come back and build a stronger business relationship later. So I think it's important as a leader for you to help everyone on your team understand the difference between bad news and bad news for now news. And I think that's really important too, because a lot of times we just look at everything as like over forever, and that's not really the case.
And you mentioned that you worked at a startup with Mark Cuban. You are also an advisor in many startups. Today, a lot of startup founders have a more technical background than Mark did, and they don't know much about sales. What do you recommend doing in this case?
Well, I think that when you think about startups, the venture capital or angel investor mentality still is, there needs to be a technical founder or two on every team. Otherwise, you're just going to get killed by cost, and you can't be very agile, and everything's cycle time takes too long on product. And we all know that. But what's been going on recently is that, especially if you're in SaaS, software as a service, there's an increasing philosophy that there'd better be someone who knows how to go grab business relationships on your team. Because if you can't go grab business relationships, then all you are is a fundraiser. So it's like the game of the startup isn't traction from a customer standpoint. The game of the startup in that regard is how much runway do you have left before you close your next round? And that's really scary. So I think that as a team, you should have a co-founder that has a track record in either user growth hacking, if you're a consumer play, or business to business development, if you're a B2B play. And that person on the team should have a seat at the table right next to the technical founders. I just went to a conference called SaaStr out in San Francisco. 4,000 different SaaStrs were there, and a lot of the key VCs and angels were there, and they talked about this idea that, there's nothing more attractive about a startup than a startup who says, here are the logos we're doing business with, and we're growing our annual guaranteed revenue, or I think they call it ARR, our annual repeatable revenue. We're growing it steadily with them year over year. Even if it's not making you cash flow positive, that's the kind of traction that really speaks to those angel and those VC investors that says this company just may take off without us in the future. And that's really, really important. So make sure if you can and have one of those people on your team, and if not, make that one of your first key hires. And when you hire them, make sure that you use equity more than commission as an incentive plan, because equity makes it a shared vision issue for the sales type or the BD types. If you just bring them in and say it's 10% for everything you can sell, you might create a client base that makes your cost structure unmanageable later. And the other thing I just want to say is that too many companies are so focused on getting a bunch of logos. That means like big companies that have done $1 worth of business with you. You want to get all these logos for your marketing stripe. But what you really should focus on is how you can please a big company in such a way that it would rather do business with you, the startup, than some legacy company like SAP when they finally figure out your space.
That's such good advice, such a good advice. And how do you recognize that a person is the right fit for you to be either the co-founder or the first hire in sales?
Well, first of all, don't ever bring someone on as a co-founder because you enjoy being around them and you like them and you find them funny and interesting and you guys party well together and you went to high school together or whatever, because the romance is going to wear off. And when you get down to like trying to drive user growth and get people to come back and try your product a second time, you're going to find out who they really are. So please be very careful about who you pick as a co-founder, because they get on your cap table. It's really hard to get them out. And if you ever build a team with people that eventually you learn are crazy, you're going to fail 99.9% of the time. The leading source of failure for a startup is picking the wrong co-founder to sit on your cap table, okay? So make it a very long process. What you should be asking yourself instead is the following few questions. 1, are they obsessed about solving the problem that your startup addresses? Can they not stop thinking about the problem? 2, what's their track record in working in a startup, or for that matter, finishing something hard? 3, is this person emotionally mature? I want you to look very hard for signs of crazy person, okay? This is the person that and I'm probably giving you too much information here, but this is the person that, the first time you guys went out and hit the club to celebrate getting a beta build done, that guy was crazy and he was on the tables and you're like, that guy's so much fun. Be very scared of that guy, okay? Look for signs for a lack of emotional maturity. And then finally, and this is number 4, look for someone who has empathy for other people. Empathy is a really important characteristic for co-founders, not just in terms of how they deal with you, but how they deal with those first few employees. Because the way that founders treat the first 10 employees sets the culture of your company forever. I think it's more important to the future of a company than how you structure your cap table.
And in terms of the skills, the sales skills, how do you recognize someone who has a strong track record compared to someone who has a track record that he or she got just by chance?
Well, that's a good question, because a lot of people are top salespeople in their organization because of the system they're working in, right? So what I want you to do is be able to talk through a candidate about a problem and see how good their problem-solving skills are, because problem-solving skills lie at the heart of the modern-day salesperson, especially in B2B. You can also do a little bit more research and talk to a few more people at their previous positions, about not just their selling skills from a charisma or a presentation standpoint, but how good they were at building teams and how many relationships they forged outside of the sales silo. That's a sure sign of a winner. So when the salesperson's really good at building relationships with other engineers, and they're just as good with the technical buying side as they are the user buying side on the other side of the table, that's a person who's not system dependent, and they'll likely be very good in your startup. And here's the last thing. Be very careful about hiring a salesperson or a sales executive or a BD person who's just come out of working at a really big company that has a lot of resources and a lot of customers. Because when they come to the world of startups, there are no systems, there are no customers, there are no resources, and they're going to have to be very scrappy. So I love to find people that have had that experience working at a really small startup before and knowing what it's like to go from 0 to 1.
I have a question that is linked to another topic or another part of your life. It's this coaching/consulting part. When you step in order to coach an organization about sales, who do you first meet, and what are the first questions that you ask?
Oftentimes I've met with the CEO. The CEO's brought me in because they want to change the culture of the entire company, or maybe even just the culture of sales. And I try to figure out how willing that CEO is to change the way they manage talent to make that happen. Guerric, it's like a company that says, I want more people to be on Salesforce. What's your big idea? I'm like, change compensation. Don't pay a commission if everything's not in Salesforce. Make Salesforce entries 20% of the annual review and you've got it fixed. And they're like, but I don't want to do that. And I go, well, you're not committed to it then. So I like to start with the top. But in certain bigger companies, I don't have that luxury. So I'll end up talking to sales. And what I want to understand is, what is their current level of sales collaboration across departments? what does their pipeline look like? Do they have an unusually high number of stuck deals? Because that represents a real plum opportunity. And then finally, I want to understand a little bit about the complexity of their market, because in my situation, I do the best when companies think of complexity in sales as the number one challenge they have to solve.
What were some of the most surprising sources of insights in which a company can learn from its customers?
I think you can learn a lot from your outliers who don't use your product correctly. The people that are trying to cheat your system by using your product in a way you don't want them to use. I mean, and by the way, I didn't make this up. This is something I learned from Vala Vakili, who worked for me at Yahoo and went on to do iHeartRadio. And he taught me that. He said, look for those outliers that just hack your system all the time and use your stuff in a way that you never thought they would have used it, because they represent the future. I mean, that's crossing the chasm. Those are the people later that are going to help your idea become mainstream, because the solution you brought to market was usually very personal to a problem you wanted to solve, but we don't always find the right problem. So that's the first thing. And the second thing I would say is embrace the people that are the most critical of your service levels and try to understand deeply why they are emotional in their criticism of your service, not why they're right or wrong, not what you necessarily can do or not do immediately. Find the source of the true emotion, and you're going to start seeing like the layers of the onion peel back to where you might find a real root cause problem that can really create a branding issue for you later. Because remember, user growth is mostly social this day. So people share their opinions widely. When there's a fire that's a really upset customer, putting the fire out is not job one, okay? Job one is finding out where the gasoline came from. Putting the fire out is job number two. So I'm not saying that you should spend all of your time talking to the people that are the most upset with you, but you should be very curious about why they are so emotional in how they've expressed themselves about your service, your product, or your app.
Tim, thank you very much for being on the show. I'm very considerate of your time, so I won't take more. I just have a last question for you. Mm-hmm. It's where can our listeners find you online?
TimSanders.com is my website. You can buy the book Dealstorming. Just go to TimSanders.com/DS, as in Dealstorm. TimSanders.com/DS. I'm on all social networks. I'm at Sanders Says.
Tim, thank you so much for being here. It was such a pleasure. And I highly recommend all of our listeners to pick up Dealstorming. This is a forward-thinking book. And yeah, I highly recommend it.
Thank you so much, Guerric. It's such a pleasure to be on the Leadership Show. Look forward to talking to you again sometime soon.
Thanks. Bye.
Hey, guys. Thanks for listening to this episode of Unlock People's Potential. This podcast was brought to you by Contriber. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes and leave a review. Let us know what you think. You can find the show notes on our blog, blog.contriber.com. Thanks for listening, and I hope you've been inspired to become a great leader and to unlock people's potential.